Thank you, and thank you for organizing this great thing and including me. My colleagues mostly talked about cutting-edge ideas. Kant and Hegel knew a lot of things, but I don't think they knew anything that Todd talked about just now. A lot of math teachers, including the ones I had, I don't think knew anything about what Deb knew. And Ricardo, some of those ideas are really, really quite old, but a lot of them are crystallized in a really cutting-edge way that Ricardo himself has pioneered the understanding of. I'm going to talk about an idea that's really about 100 years old. It's one you've all been taught over and over again in classes you've taken, but I just see so many people not doing it and getting it wrong that I wanted to, for the next 11 minutes and 39 seconds, vent about it in the form of 3 ideas. In the beginning of your economics class, you probably got something like the definition that Lionel Robbins gave for economics a century ago. Economics is a science which studies human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses. One important thing in this definition that certainly we're at pains to make clear in Ec 10, and a lot of classes do here, there's nothing in that that says anything about money. Your ends could be more money, but they could also be more time, more health, more happiness, more all sorts of things. And from the perspective of public policy, your ends could be more GDP, but they could also be lower poverty, less inequality, national security, or anything else as well. So the first idea is that there are a lot of trade-offs out there, and we're often afraid to recognize them because we have just a really, really deep-seated belief that all good things go together. I think this particular idea is one that, frankly, I more often see progressives sort of forgetting, but you see other types as well. So maybe let's call it the progressive vice a little bit unfairly, because not all progressives have it, and not only progressives have this vice. So one version of it is when you hear somebody say, we should do this as a public policy or a business, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. That could be offering paid leave. It could be doing something about climate change. It could be, greater diversity. It could be any one of those things. Some of those actually might be the smart thing to do. You might increase your profits because you do them. But very often that's not the case. I had a student who came in and wanted to do a PAE with me a couple years ago, and his argument, which he hadn't done any research on, but he was reasonably sure that it was the case, was that private equity companies would make more money if they never cut jobs in the companies they took over. And I said to him, how would you like the world to be? Would you sort of like them to cut the jobs or not cut the jobs? And he said, I'd like them not to cut the jobs. And I said, why would you want the private equity company to hire you? All they want to do is make profits. You're sort of biased because you have this other thing that you care about. And maybe you're reading that into it. And by the way, haven't even done the research yet. Paid sick leave might be the same thing. There's way too many companies in this country that don't offer paid sick leave. I can't remember the number, but I think more than 30% of workers don't have paid sick leave. We don't have a national requirement. And it's sort of tempting to go to a company and say, hey, you'd be better off if you'd offer paid sick leave. But of course, that company is reasonably smart at understanding how to maximize profits. Now, I think they make errors all the time, companies. But the idea that every error goes in the direction of how you wanted the world to be is probably somewhat less probable. I heard this from the administration, which included a child care requirement in the CHIPS money, the money for semiconductors. And they said this will help businesses attract more workers, and so they'll actually be able to make better microchips if they have child care. And again, the question was sort of, I understand why the administration likes childcare, I do too. Why do you think the businesses didn't figure that out? If they could sort of do a $5,000 childcare program and get workers and get much better workers, they'd need to pay their workers quite as much, they'd go ahead and do that. Again, my argument isn't that businesses always optimize. It's just that the errors they make probably don't always go in the direction of making the world happier. This shows up in other places too. When COVID first hit, I was very strongly of the belief, and I think this was true in the first month, that saving lives was good for the economy. And that if you shut your economy down, you could stamp out the virus, and then 2 months later you could emerge from hiding, and your GDP would be that much higher because you had taken 2 months off. I think that was the right view given the evidence that was available at the time. Certainly within a certain amount of time, and I'm positive that by 2021 that just wasn't the case. Red states reopened their economies much earlier in 2021, and their GDP went up much faster, and incomes went up, and jobs went up much faster than the blue states that stayed closed. Europe reopened even further after the blue states did in the United States, and its GDP was lower. Jobs were lower, and incomes were lower. There wasn't some, you just shut the economy down, stamp the virus out, and go ahead. You see it in macro too. If you subsidize some activity, you're going to get more of that activity, but you're probably going to get less of something else. You subsidize for climate change, the cost of building things goes up. You're going to get more things for climate change, but less of everything else. And we're seeing that right now with higher interest rates, higher prices, and the like. You see that, and I'll just give one last example, and then I'll try to convince you I'm a nice person when I get to number 2 and number 3, is something like student loan debt relief. It's a really nice thing if all you count is the student loan debt relief, but are we really going to be able to expand consumption by $500 billion if that's how much debt relief you're giving? Probably not. If those people want to spend more, maybe they'll drive prices up, so everyone else will be able to spend less, or maybe interest rates will go up, so it'll be harder to borrow, or maybe taxes will be higher in the future, spending will be lower in the future. This isn't to say student loan debt relief is a good or a bad idea. It's just saying unless you take into account all of those other channels, you can't just look at the direct beneficiaries. All of this is important because the direct beneficiaries are the ones that always show up and lobby for the policy. So idea number 2 is, notwithstanding everything I just said, we have more goals than just income and GDP. When it comes to the pandemic, we care an awful lot about saving lives. The states that reopened faster, a lot more people died. Europe did better in terms of lives than the United States because it stayed closed for longer. When you provide subsidies for climate change, you get less carbon emissions, you lower future global surface temperatures, and you save lives all around the world. If you have paid sick leave, you might reduce, provide better insurance for people, better lives for people. And I think the conservative vice is to point out that just because something, is to make the false argument that something has a cost and it's not worth doing. Such and such addressing climate change, it'll have a cost, it'll hurt the economy, let's not do it. And that type of lexicographic reasoning that treats the world as if there's only one goal that you care about and only one way to evaluate it, which is money or GDP, is something that I'm dwelling on less because I frankly hear that vice less in the circles I travel in, but it's just as pernicious. So that brings me to the third lesson, which is it's basically unavoidable to do cost-benefit analysis. And to do cost-benefit analysis, you need to find a common set of units. Because we have all these different goals that are really different, national security, lives, inequality, poverty, GDP, wages, whatever else, it's really hard to sort of add and subtract one against each other unless you do a common set of units. The units that economists use are the units of money. That's not actually because we think money is the only thing that matters or even the most important thing that matters. We could have used as units, the pleasure of spending a Saturday afternoon with your child. And you could convert every one of those things I just said. How much, national security would you get in exchange for, reducing the number of pleasant Saturday afternoons you spend with your child? Add that up across everyone. And then you could do all your cost-benefit analysis by units of pleasant Saturday afternoons with your child. You could do it with bananas. You could do it with anything that you want. It's just that we find it a whole lot easier to use this one unit, which is money. When you take that to the problem of COVID, I think you would have found out that relatively early on, closing bars did have a trade-off. It reduced the utility people got from going to bars. It reduced the pay that people got at bars. My guess is that overwhelmingly, if you put a value on a life of, say, $10 million a life, would have passed a cost-benefit test, and you'd say, do that. Open-air construction sites, you probably would not have wanted to close them. And notice, by the way, there probably was some COVID that was transmitted because we kept open-air construction sites going. And in some European countries, by the way, they shut them down for an extended period of time. But there, probably the cost in terms of jobs and GDP just wasn't worth it for the person you saved. Some people are deeply uncomfortable with something like putting a value on a life, which was implicit in the two statements I just said. In some ways, I think you should be deeply uncomfortable with anyone who's not doing that, because that's someone who might be taking all sorts of opportunities to save lives at a low cost and sort of missing them and not realizing them and not doing them. And that's someone who's operating with a scarce budget and doing something here to save one life when they could have done something here to save 100 lives. And now, in their morality of ignoring the cost of a life, they just killed 99 people. So I would conclude by saying, don't be afraid of trade-offs. Don't think everything good goes together. It's way too tempting to think that. There are just so many places where there are trade-offs that you're not thinking about. But the second thing is, don't, just because of that, say don't do it, because there's a trade-off. Don't be afraid of it. And the final thing is bring things together, measure them in money. But remember, money isn't the most important thing. It's just a whole lot easier than measuring things in terms of what really is important, which is Saturday afternoons with your children. Thank you.